Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. It's our first ever summit, so it really does mean a lot. Hope you've been enjoying the sessions. Hope you enjoy this one even more. And I hope you appreciate the color coordination that we've done. Absolutely planned. We're now going to be having the Women of CX panel, an incredibly important topic on why we need more CX in the C-suite. So first off, some introductions. We were meant to have Becky with us today, but unfortunately she wasn't able to come. But you will see her in future sessions, don't worry. So first, I want to pass it over to Rhea. So Rhea Fox is the digital director at Paperchase. So over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. You can tell things have moved on a little bit since I was signed up for this summit because I'm now the former digital director at Paperchase as of 31st of Jan when our lovely friends at Tesco bought the brand. I was digital director at Paperchase for a year, seeing the business through the sale process from Permira to new investors. Prior to that, for my sins, I was at eBay for a very long time and also at Aviva. So I was in an insight role at eBay, very much focused on all things CX, CRM and customer insight. And then I was at Aviva for 4 years in a marketing role, but also managed the voice of the customer team there. So enormous program of 15 million customers, Aviva, the general insurance market leader. So very thrilled to be here today. Thanks for the invitation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We now have the absolutely incredible PaulaBobbet, the Chief Digital Officer at Boots.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm Chief Digital Officer at Boots UK. I've been there for about 2.25 years. Prior to that, 7 years at Dixon's Carphone, all in digital. My background actually is largely digital analytics and analytics in general. So I've worked for British Airways, Debenhams, various big household name brands, but thrilled to be here today.
Thank you so much. And we have the brilliant Jade Roberts, Head of CX, and Monica Vinader.
Thank you. So nice to be here. So my role at Monica Vinader is Head of Customer Experience and Logistics. Big role, to say the least. I have a very strategic role. It's quite recently moved on from being contact centre focused, and we're kind of branching into this customer experience as a totality of the brand. So it's really exciting to be here today and having these conversations with you all about that.
Amazing. Thank you. And before I forget, I'm Chandni, VP of Marketing at Chattermill. Been here about 2 years now, building the marketing function. So really exciting to see this sort of turn out for our first ever summit. So moving on. Sorry, where is the clicker? Thank you. So moving on. First off, we want to start with the million-dollar question. Why aren't there more CX leaders in the C-suite? So Paula, Rhea, Jade, what are your thoughts on this?
Shall I go first?
Go for it.
I really think it depends on the organisation. So if I look at Boots UK, really CX kind of sits under the remit of both myself and the CMO. So there's no one person responsible, but I think collectively we are responsible. I also think it depends on the organisation. So you've got organisations who are really customer-obsessed, customer-focused. They do have those roles. But I agree that organisations in general are not as focused on the customer as they should be.
Yeah, I'm happy to build on that. And the eBay example is always a good one for me in that, a business needs to have a very significant level or a reasonably significant level of complexity, in my opinion, before it's really necessary to have that customer leader at the table. So if you take somewhere like Amazon, I think to your point, everyone in the business is their job is customer, very customer focused. I think when a business is very complex, potentially when there are competing needs, and there absolutely are between sellers and buyers, and it's always a trade-off to manage the two, that's when it's really important that customer experience sits at the top table. But even when I was at eBay and I was running the European Customer Programme, there was no customer leader, there was no chief customer officer either globally or in Europe. That's changed. That's new. They now have that person. But I would go so far as to say, even at Aviva, massively complex organisation, a complex business sector, insurance. There's no chief customer officer now. Arguably there should be, but I think it comes to a head for businesses to get to a point where they feel they need one, and some of that's about scale and complexity, but also I think there needs to be a realisation at the very highest levels that customer experience is a big factor in why a business may or may not be succeeding. And actually, sometimes, it often is, but not always. So I think it's, for me, those two things. It's complexity and size, but also there needs to be a very deep-seated acknowledgement at probably the CEO level, or recognition that it's customer experience that's really hurting the bottom line.
Yeah, and I think particularly for businesses, we've touched on it earlier today, but it does feel quite like a leap of faith to have this CX position become part of your business. And there is a big way up between what commercial impact does this have versus taking things we perhaps think we know and then acting on them. So it's a big jump.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. Does CX need to come under the CMO, CCO, or does it require a separate role? What are your thoughts on this?
I suppose if I look at my organisation, it probably sits under the CMO, and the CMO actually reports into the CCO. So we've got a little bit of both. I think actually it's important as well, though, so from my perspective, I look after digital experience, so I want kind of like the guardrails that marketing provide, but equally I want to control my own digital experience within that framework. So I think it's important to have a role. I think a CMO is a good place to sit, but equally, depending on your organisation, maybe a customer officer is a better option.
And sometimes in some businesses, certainly that I've worked in and seen others, sometimes when there's a chief customer officer, but they're not from the business, when they've been brought in to do that job, there can be a bit of a sense that they're kind of floating around, talking about nice to have customer stuff and, kind of telling people they ought to make customers happy. And actually, that's not really what CX is. And it's a really good way to have all things customer kind of filed under nice to have and farting around. So I think, sometimes there is an advantage to having customer experience sat with someone who's got skin in the game in one of the other big disciplines, either operational, CCO or CMO. It feels more organic as part of how the business is run. It doesn't feel like you've kind of bolted on some nice to have customer stuff where everyone kind of sits and nods and looks at the debriefs about, what matters and politely moves on.
I think that's a really important point, actually, and I've seen that in action where it just hasn't worked, where someone has an idea, but actually they don't control any of the levers, and so they can't make it actionable.
Yeah, and maybe our business is quite a good example, and to touch on what Rhea said earlier, it kind of depends on the size of the business that you are and where it needs to sit. So we're a relatively small business. I report into a C-suite level. I'm on this panel, I'm not in the C-suite. Hello, imposter syndrome. It's always here. But for us, that means, I can take good leadership from people that are very heavily invested in customer experience, and I can maybe take a focus on that, and that's definitely right for us now, given the scale that we are. I guess like a really great example for us in terms of why it's quite important for us to have a head of CX, and I guess there will be other businesses here that maybe don't even have that in their structure and are thinking about doing that, but we have very operational C-suite leaders, so they're very focused on the commercial channels, whether that's marketing or our boutiques or our e-com channels. And actually, some data that we found recently was a huge proportion of our customers are actually buying for a gift and not for themselves. And actually, we spend a lot of time focusing on the user of our website or our boutique experience. They're not actually the end user of our product, and by having someone that can advocate for the customer in their entirety, and someone that sits in CX, we can actually then start to look at the other proportion of customers that we have that will ultimately translate to revenue, and ultimately we're missing in the channel functions.
Amazing, incredible insight. Moving on to the next topic. So you wanted to speak a little bit about what impact you think this is having on business performance. So what would you say on this particular question?
I think it's a really interesting one, because I think there's a short-term, there's a long-term impact. So, for example, businesses can make really commercial decisions that don't take into account the customer, and that's absolutely fine, but it's the knock-on impact of that hits back later when that customer doesn't return. So it's much cheaper to actually retain that customer than it is to acquire them. And I think that's where customer experience becomes really important, because that first experience is going to determine whether you come back or not.
Yeah, and I think it depends on, in some ways, how strong the insight function is too. So I'll give you an example. At eBay, we were absolutely drowning in surveys when I joined. I mean, you could not believe it. Enormous, expensive NPS program, insight dotted all over the place, surveys coming out of our ears. It absolutely crucified me earlier in the week to find out that Bain have been in the business recently with a survey telling the new senior leadership that the buying experience is difficult. Well, yeah. God, dust off my survey from 8 years ago. But it will always be difficult because it's the second biggest marketplace in the world and a two-sided marketplace, and it's new and it's used and it's refurb. It's not going to be the world's most simple buying experience. So what I would, though, say is, certainly when I was there, one of the things we focused on as an insight team was to really get a sense of the absolute business drivers of things that were holding us back from improving on customer frequency. And there were lots of insights, but the really, really crucial ones, and we were able to do this because we had NPS at customer level, obviously deduped, so it was all anonymised. But what we found was that certainly in the UK, if customers didn't receive their items quickly, their frequency went down. In Germany, if they didn't receive them on time, frequency went down. And we could quantify what that cost in terms of hundreds of millions to each marketplace. So actually, once the insight was there, I won't say all the leadership teams needed to look at was those two metrics, but it was a damn good start. And we found that when we'd worked on very heavily driving those markers up, NPS went up, but it was a lag indicator, frequency went up more. So, I think if the insight is very strong, well established and understood by the C-suite, it's not necessary for someone to be in there banging that drum, but it really does depend on the absolute crispness and clarity of that insight so that everybody at the top table knows absolutely with confidence what it is that's going to drive business performance from a CX point of view.
Yeah, I think the other impact is just generally having someone that's a catalyst for that in your business and being able to have those conversations. That, for us, something super powerful is being able to present our customer care team with data around the cost to acquire that customer, and then how do they make a decision based on that insight that they have, and not having someone focused on CX means actually the customer care team, which traditionally has probably been thought of the totality of your experience, which obviously it's really not, but they're now empowered to make much better commercial decisions for the business by the experience that they give an end customer, which you kind of need someone driving that behind, otherwise how do they get that insight?
Such a great point. Amazing. And how do we convince businesses to take CX more seriously?
Ultimate question, Chandni.
Literally the ultimate question.
Put the money on it. Spend the time working out how much those CX problems are costing you in terms of opportunity or loss, and make sure that's fully understood. That is the ultimate way to everybody in the businesses, or should be, hearts.
I mean, yes, that. I think the other thing as well is actually making them live that experience. Because I think if you can kind of go through what a customer goes through, then you understand why you're losing money and why it's so painful. And that often switches people on to say, well, we really need to fix that.
Yeah, I think Amanda touched on it earlier, actually. To be great in CX, you need to be a fantastic storyteller and you need to have that buy-in. And the people sat at the C-suite table need to understand not just the end goal of a customer. It's not just the what do they need to do. It's how do they feel on that journey and what's every step that they get to there.
I think both of those points actually are really important in the sense of, make them feel it and live it. And sometimes that can mean, you kind of get rolled eyes, don't you? Or make the finance director go and listen to some calls. Jesus, they dutifully plod along and they tell you it was really insightful and they go back to their day jobs. But actually, I think your point about engagement and yours is really important, which is you've got to serve it up to them in ways that they want to consume and feel meaningful for them. And sometimes that might be call listening, but equally it might be, however they like to consume that information. For an FD, it's probably going to be, we had this many drop calls, which cost us this many, sales. So I think it's a really good point.
It's just a small example. I brought the rest of our C-suite down to our online team to sit with them and see how they set up products, how they put promotions up. because often get asked the question, why can't you go faster? Why can't I go quicker? And after that, they were like, okay, we understand now. We're not going to ask anymore. And actually, we do need to invest in our systems. So it is really powerful if you can make it happen.
Incredible examples. If you don't have a culture of customer obsession or CX in the C-suite, what can others do to push this forward?
I guess just don't be afraid to advocate for it. I mean, everyone in a business is responsible for a customer. Go out there, make your point, have that conversation, book a one-to-one, have a meeting, share the insight that you have. I think don't be scared to do that.
Yeah, I think C-suite people are often quite envious of their nearest competitors as well. So actually being able to say, do you know what, so-and-so does this loads better than us and they've got more market share, I think can often be quite a good catalyst.
It's a great shout.
Amazing. Thank you. So I guess the final topic for today is about increasing female representation in leadership. So I have two more questions. What actions should businesses take to build gender diversity at leadership level and increase female representation in the C-suite?
So I'm going to start by saying something a little bit controversial.
Love it.
I, as well as this role, I have a non-executive director role. And that business has actually said, we want a quota of women. We're going to have 30, 40, 50% of women, both on the board and the exec in this time. Now, I really firmly believe in the right person for the job, but I think what it does do is it really changes the mindset and it focuses them on saying, actually, well, if we're going to recruit people in, let's make sure we have an appropriate slate to do that. So I think, number one, that is actually quite important. And it frustrates me where I work, we do have that, but we're not trying to drive that number forwards. I also think, listening to you to talk earlier, actually, imposter syndrome is a really big one. And women in general, I think, are less willing to take risks. So I think it's really important to have a mentor, both a female mentor and actually a male mentor. I've had some absolutely brilliant male mentors who will push you forward, challenge your assumptions. Where you do think, oh, I'm not confident, I can't do this, have someone who can push you forwards and show you differently. And look for like-minded people in the business who'll do that.
I mean, ultimately, completely agree. I think we actually had this conversation in the networking break, a few of us, just around how women generally feel like they shouldn't have their seat at the table, and that just shouldn't be the case. Just stop apologising and get out there and say what you want to say. What's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big, hairy one, isn't it, this? And I certainly don't pretend to have the answers, but one of the things that fascinates me is kind of, I'm not sure the right word of it, but kind of where different aspects of discrimination or representation meet. So I once congratulated myself on having a tremendously diverse team. We had a lot of diversity in a small team by ethnicity, by sexuality, by age. And so actually, when my boss at the time said he was disappointed that I didn't turn up to the diversity lunch and learn, I said, well, I think I should be teaching it because look at my team. And only with tongue in cheek. And I was very happy about that. And then it transpired about 6 months later as we were talking about our backgrounds as a team, very close-knit team, that out of everybody, only 1 out of 8 had not been to public school, which was a real moment for me where I thought, you're not doing as well as you thought. So I think for me, I'm actually a favour of soft quotas. I likewise agree with the best man in the job, or the best woman in the job, or the best anything else in the job. But I think it's really very important to take a rounded view of diversity. And the other thing I think from a CX point of view is a lot of CX leaders come up through the operations track, which I think is reasonable. It makes a lot of sense, but it does bring a very kind of operations customer service lens to CX quite often. And I think there's often a danger, if you're a woman, to be seen to be, if it's not positioned correctly, to be seen to be kind of banging this customer drum, which can be seen to be quite soft, if it's not grounded properly in a man's world of C-suite. So again, for me, that's about making sure that whoever sits in the CX seat, and particularly if they're a woman, and they're speaking the language of the business and not falling into that trap that says, customers, cozy, service, women. That's a dangerous trap for CX to fall into and women to fall into, I think, as well.
Absolutely. How can women support each other to move into leadership positions? And just to add to that, I would say not just women, how can men support as well?
I really strongly believe in the power of allies. And I've had lots of them. In fact, throughout my career, I would say I've had like 3 or 4 men who've been brilliant allies to me. And I think they need to be there pushing you forwards when you're worried. They need to introduce you into conversations. So for me personally, I'm quite softly spoken. I used to have someone who'd bring me into the conversation and got my voice heard. So I think everyone has a role to play, whether you're male or whether you're female, in actually pushing women forwards.
Yeah, completely echo that. Advocate for each other, I think, ultimately is the goal, isn't it? Have networks of people that you rely on. Go to events, talk to people, introduce people to others that you know, connect on LinkedIn, have those conversations. Don't be afraid to knowledge share. If you're, not in a competitive industry with someone, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel every time? Let's just share that knowledge and make great connections and support each other.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's all about the network and paying it forward. Advocating, yes, for your teams and people beneath you, but also in your network. Recommend people, introduce people. The amount of times you'll introduce someone and say, "I think you'll really get on with so and so. You've got something in common," and you find out they're working together. Years later, it's just really rewarding. And I think the more you pay it forward, the more comes back to you.
Yeah, the other thing I would say as well is share your story. Because often I think when you look up at people, you think that they're not like you and they've not suffered how you have and they've not had imposter syndrome and they've had a really easy ride to the top. But often actually the stories are quite powerful and make you realise you're just human. And actually those stories can be hard and they can be difficult, but actually they can drive you forwards.
The stories you've given today, they've just been so inspirational for me personally. So I completely agree. We're now going to move on to the Q&A. So yes, any questions from the audience for our incredible panel?
Hi. Oh, I don't know if you can see me. I'm Kirsty. I'm the head of product at an insurtech called By Miles, so a sort of startup scale-up stage. I was really interested in hearing about talking the language of the CFO, the CEO, when you're putting forward cases for prioritizing CX. There are certain, I guess, initiatives or, bits of the strategy you might have where that's quite hard to quantify, or when you actually quantify, it doesn't give the full picture. So think accessibility and user experiences, for example. It's something we should absolutely be doing, having fully accessible UX. But maybe that's a really small percentage of your users, and so it doesn't come out in the data. Do you have any experience, I guess, or advice of other ways in which you've managed to use your influence when it's difficult to prove with ROI?
I'll give you an insurance example since we're insurance friends. The best advice I was ever given was by an ex-consultant who I worked with at GHD. And I was, at the time, I was an insight role 13 years ago, very purist, my God, if I haven't got any actual real data, what do I do? I'm making it up. And she just, make it up, make an assumption. And you kind of go, shit, what do you mean? You say, well, if your survey says you've got a drop-off rate of 50%, how much do you think it is in reality? Oh, God, I don't know, 15? She went, great, put that. And actually, and I say that flippantly, best business lesson I ever learned, which is if you've got a data set that's 60% complete, make it up. And actually, use common sense assumptions. So one of the things I did with my voice of the customer team at Aviva was exactly that, which is to say, well, actually, on average, if we get 13,000 calls a day, and we don't answer 10% of them, and of that 10%, roughly 1 in 10 convert, then you can work out from that roughly how many policies you didn't write that day because the phones weren't answered. So it cost you X in agent time, and it cost you Y in policy time. And it might be actually you get to net, in which case that's not that's not in the red. But actually, if you do that for all of the things in your user experience, I think you will quickly come to a hierarchy. And actually, that's not necessarily the way a CFO would work it out, but I've come to realise it's absolutely the way CEOs and strategy leads quickly work it out. So that would be how I'd go about it for you. And particularly, you've got hard numbers in insurance, and you know how many calls answered or how many journeys were abandoned. So let me know if I can help, but that's how I'd go about it.
Hello, I'm Jenny. I'm the Customer Experience Product Manager at Cuckoo Broadband. You mentioned about networking being a really good opportunity to kind of get into the C-suite. I've personally tried to do some more of this myself, recently. I'm finding that a lot of the women in CX groups are invite-only and elitist in that aspect. Are there any next steps that you would recommend for people that are in those more junior roles and stepping into that area to get in?
That sounds like a me question. You've just got to keep talking to people, and I think I've never been afraid to say we have a problem and express that to people. So actually, a great friend of mine is actually sat here who I met through a networking opportunity just because we were having a challenge in our call center. And ever since then, we've kind of bounced off of each other and we use each other as peers. I think you're in the perfect space right now that hopefully we are not elitist. This is the exact opportunity where you need to kind of share, connect on LinkedIn. But once you've connected on LinkedIn, send that message. Don't be afraid to kind of reach out again once you think, oh, that's a challenge. How would they approach that? Or have they had the same thing? And send that message a few months down the line and reconnect. And just keep trying to have those conversations. Don't give up. It's going to happen.
I guess I would say as well, don't limit yourself just to CX events. There are loads of, sorry, I probably shouldn't say that, should I? Sorry. But there are loads of good e-commerce events out there. There's loads of, good retail events out there. All of those will build you a network. And they might not be exactly the CX person you want to talk to, but they probably know someone who is and can then help you with that network. I always think these networking events are really awkward as well. I had a brilliant talk from someone at a Be Inspired event, actually, about how to go about networking. And basically, if you pick someone in the room who looks as awkward as you and walk up and say, I'm feeling really awkward, it's a really great conversation starter. So I'd definitely try that one.
Thank you so much for that question. Do you have time for any more? No? No more time? Okay, amazing. I want to say thank you so much to our incredible panel. Just so much insight, so many examples. I've personally learned so much. Thank you so much. And please do join us for future sessions for the Women of CX series. But thank you.